The Benjamin Dixon Show is only possible with listener support. Go to www.thebenjamindixonshow.com to register for our blog and join the Progressive Army.
I want to preface today's episode with, just a warning. This is a conversation about the move that Donald Trump made today, moving the United States Embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. And I, of course, called in my friend, Professor Matt Sienkiewicz, who I yield to on these conversations because of his depth of knowledge. We address the specific issue. We address the atrocity that's happening at the border with about 45 Palestinians being killed. We address those very specifically. And then we allowed ourselves to meander. I would say the last 20 minutes, we meandered through some questions that I think are pretty relevant and salient once we got them out. So I just wanted to put that up there. As you listen to this, let your brain wander and let your questions formulate. And what are your thoughts about it? And what type of thinking does it stimulate in your mind? Because that's this kind of episode. All right, let's listen in. Joining me now is Professor Matt Sienkiewicz. I have him on the show on a regular basis for many different things. He's filled in with me, for me, rather. And Professor Matt, how are you doing this morning?
I'm doing okay, Ben. It's kind of a rough day.
It's a rough day. And I wanted to start with something, we've talked offline before we started the conversation, but I didn't mention this. I want to give you a chance to distance yourself from me based on something I said on Twitter, if you feel so inclined. I started today off with Benjamin Netanyahu is a truly evil man. And I stand behind that because of how he juxtaposed his story of not being able to get to a certain border when he was a child because of sniper fire. But then in the backdrop, he gives this story as a triumphant story of where he is now. And in the backdrop, Israeli defense forces are literally killing dozens of Palestinian protesters, and he's like mocking them, in my opinion. So I said that Benjamin Netanyahu is a truly evil man, and I don't want to sandbag you with that. So if you feel so inclined, you could distance yourself from me on that.
I mean, evil is probably not a vocabulary that I generally dive into. I could say that I do not believe that he is a man who is doing anything to move the world in a better place right now. So I'm not gonna label that more than that, but that's well, you know what? I should take it further. I think he's pushing the world to a worse place every minute. And so if you want to label that your way, that's okay. Yeah. I'm not going to say evil, but I'll say that I think he's not a force for peace. I think he's not a force for good. And yeah, I mean,
he's almost
I have nothing nice to say. I'll say that much.
Someone replied to me on Twitter, and they said that he's actually like cartoon evil. And if we could substitute evil for villain, right? He's like a cartoon villain, even with the graphics that he used at the United Nations of the cartoon bomb.
He loves terrible, like overwrought graphics. His visual style is it's very childish. It's very he wants to paint a world in which everything is simple,
right?
Which, given the part of the world he lives in, is just the most ridiculous and offensive way of going about it. I mean, anybody on any side of any of these issues in the Middle East who say, "Oh, here, I can explain it to you in 3 minutes. It's simple," that person's lying to you, and they're up to no good. And I will give you, it might be a little bit trite, but just his font selection and the way he does his visuals says this is a man who wants to convince you this stuff is simple. And he's gonna try to slide some pretty I see why you went to the word evil. He's gonna put some dangerous stuff past you under the guise of being simple, under the guise of being straightforward, and he's gonna hide a whole bunch of trouble in there, and that's what he does. The bomb is the silliest.
Right. Well, I mean,
that's something to laugh about today.
Second, yeah, I was going to say at least that's like the funniest thing that we can find. Like that's the only moment of levity that we can find in the backdrop of everything that's happening with Donald Trump's policy being enacted, moving the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, and the showcase that they had. I mean, there's so many layers of this. I think I want to start first with the people who have been killed. The last I checked, there's over 45, I believe, that have been killed, Palestinian protesters, and the justification is always that they're not really protesters. But when you look at the videos, like if there was real violence, one thing I can say about the media is that they are exploitative no matter what. If there was a significant amount of violence being caused by these protesters, cameras would be locked on that one, on repeat of that one instance of violence. And the most that you can actually find on loop, on whether it's Fox News, MSNBC, or any of these other CNN, has been tires on fire, right? There's been fires, and so. And this is not to say that
kites being sent on fire over the border, that kind of thing.
You know, and now 45 people, including minors, one young girl was killed. And, you know, on the opposite side of the screen, it's the perfect juxtaposition of the problem of what the anguish that I'm feeling today. On the opposite side of the screen, you have this highly sanitized, very clean and beautiful presentation of the embassy being dedicated, and they're speaking in terms of justice and righteousness, and they're doing the will of God. And on the opposite side of the two split screen, you see the price of this sanitized treachery, in my opinion. What do you think?
Yeah, you know, the juxtaposition you point to is really powerful, and the needlessness of it is what strikes me in particular. Particularly, I mean, the look, there's a lot that led to this moment, and a lot that led to the protests on the Gaza border, and it's not by any means strictly based on the embassy move. However, the embassy move does nothing for the better. It casts doubt on the motives of anybody who you know, from the American side, at least, who might want to do something to mitigate. So basically just throws us out of that equation. Who knows? Maybe at this point that's for the best. In terms, and I guess back to that embassy, it's just such a sham. It's such a like this dog and pony show, sort of showing off to each other. You get the sense that nobody believes what they're saying. The combination of people invited to that thing is like such craziness. So that's on the one side, and on the Gaza border side, I mean, you know, it's one of those. It's a very common. You know, I find myself in this situation over and over again when it comes to particularly Gaza. You look at a particular crisis moment, and it is kind of complicated, and it's hard to figure out exactly what they should do. And in this case, clearly, there's got to be a way to address these protests without killing dozens of people. I'm not that there has to be. That said, it is a problem. I mean, you know, you've got a government at war with Israel sending people to the border. You know, with some suggestion that they're going to break through. That's a problem. It has to be addressed in a much more reasonable and sort of proportionate way. Absolutely. I don't know how to do that. Right? I don't understand how that should be done. It's not this way. But then, of course, why are they in that situation? They're in that situation because, you know, Israel, Egypt, America, the rest of the world has left Gaza to just fester. I mean, to become a totally unlivable place, a place with lacking sewage, a place with no clean water, a place with, you know, electricity, like some tiny portion of the day. And so, I mean, if this just came out of nowhere, right? If this was like a perfectly stable place and people were massing at the border and threatening to burst through a fence, you know, okay, that would be something to deal with. Hopefully not by killing. But it'd be a hard situation for a country to deal with. But we can't just take it in isolation, and that's one of the things that a Netanyahu wants you to do. Right? He wants you to take everyone. Just look at the situation. Just look at the isolated moment of people at the border bursting through our border, as though that just came from nowhere. So on the one hand, on the one side of the screen, you've got this situation steeped in this disastrous history of Israel's policy in Gaza, of Egypt's policy in Gaza, of America's sort of standing by idly. And on the other side, you just have another thing that's going to make more problems moving forward. This ridiculous embassy show. Yeah. So I don't know. It's kind of a rant I just went on, but hopefully it made some sense.
No. It makes sense. And here's the height of frustration for me. It is this new wave of this new technique by right wingers across the globe, and maybe it's not new. Maybe we're just a new generation getting accustomed to it. But it's the sanitization of their crimes, of what they are doing, and the ability to convince and look and have the appearance of being gentlemen and being ladies and being proper and prim and everything clean, and underneath it is a very violent campaign that's coupled with a tremendous propaganda machine that makes them look at incidents in isolation. And what I mean by that is, like, there's a full history of why there are protesters, of why there is the quote unquote conflict, but at the border of the Gaza border. But you're not given any context of that whatsoever. And they sit back with amazement and shock and awe and say things like, this is an affront to Israel, or this is an affront to American values, or this is an affront to whatever right-wing iteration of this that you see across the globe. This is the technique. They provoke, they incite, they create the conditions for this. America's, not just even the right-wing side of America in general. We create the conditions for these types of conflicts across the globe, and then we sit back and say, look at the violence that look at how they're behaving when we created the situation for it. That is the most frustrating thing, and to see it on television like that in a two frame, it's just the height of how shameless humans can be in their hypocrisy.
Yeah, I mean, at the very least, we have been complicit along every step of the way. I mean, there is a wide swath of blame to go on issues like this. I mean, when you're talking, though, what comes to me is the useful idiocy of Kushner, of Jared Kushner, who, I mean, talk about a sanitized vision, right? I mean, and he's standing there, saying that the protesters are part of the problem, not part of the solution. I mean, they're certainly symptomatic of a broader problem, and I'm not sure if they push towards a solution, but they are definitely not the problem, right? The people protesting at the border, right? The conditions in Gaza are the problem. I mean, the Hamas government is the problem. The Israeli government is absolutely the problem. The Egyptian government is the problem. But the idea of having this guy who, I mean, Kushner in particular, who, his connection to the problem is strictly arm's length, right? I mean, he never showed any interest in this topic. He never did. He wasn't devoted to Middle East issues. He just shows up as a Jewish guy related to the president, stands there completely sanitized. I mean, the guy is just sanitized of any semblance of understanding what he's doing.
Right.
And pointing to this one little thing and saying that's the problem, right? The problem is this thin line of 30,000 people or whatever it worked out to be in terms of protesters. Yeah, I mean, essentially, I'm with you on it. I mean, you want to be careful not to suggest that internal dynamics, let's say, in the Palestinian political sphere, aren't also a problem. Of course they are. America isn't the problem, but they are a big we are a big part of the problem, and putting on a show and pretending that the symptom is the disease,
right,
is
that's it.
It just does.
Yeah.
It does nothing. It does nothing for anyone. I mean.
That's it right there, Matt. Like the symptom is the disease. No, what we're seeing, and not only the symptom, but the barbaric treatment of the symptom, right?
Yeah, yes, right.
And here's the thing, right? There is, we rid ourselves of these romanticized notions of valor in any state government, any government whatsoever, right? We'd be wise to do the same for the Palestinians, right? So I definitely agree with you there. But and what's happening today is if nothing else, right, for people of I don't know, of some type of goodness or something, you know, I hate to speak today in terms of good and evil, but, you know, today is a day where you could literally look at the television and see that our entire perception of good and evil or right and wrong or just, let's just talk in terms of justice and injustice, is completely warped. It's just completely twisted. And maybe today can have some good ramifications or have something reverberate from it, good, in the sense that people will begin to be awakened to this, right? The fact that what we're seeing on television in the clean, sanitized Jared Kushner, as he speaks of the protesters being the problem, you know, maybe people of goodwill will look at that and actually see, no, that's not the case. Or maybe I'm just trying to find something hopeful in a day that's pretty grim.
Yeah, I think that two things, both upsetting, come to mind. One, tomorrow could be worse, and I mean that literally. Yeah. Literally tomorrow, the commemoration of Land Day, of the Nakba, amongst Palestinian people, it could be worse. So we could be seeing a this is not a one-off by any stretch.
Right.
That comes to mind. The next thing that comes to mind is, man, as awful as it is, this just happens every X amount of years. Like, it just happens. It happens, and always the cause is different, but always the cause is the same. Right. So there's always approximate cause, which is different. There's always something that recently has happened, which explains the given outbreak of an intifada or a war or rockets coming from Lebanon or from Gaza or into Lebanon or into Gaza. There's always an immediate reason why, but the underlying reason is that we've never made any tangible movement towards peace. And that is, obviously, like, that sounds pie in the sky to even talk about, but that's always the deep reason, but there's always another proximate reason. There will, what we see today doesn't strike me as that different as things we've seen over and over again. I mean, I think there was some hope that the sort of like cartoonish absurdity of this combination of Trump and Netanyahu would make it bubble over so that people had to see, but
maybe not.
Yeah, and there's a couple of reasons for that. I mean, on the one hand, it is really complicated. The history is extremely difficult to follow through. Anybody who tells you that it's not is lying. And so it requires actually knowing stuff, which, is, always tough and particularly unpopular with certain governmental figures today. So, I mean, there's that. And then there's the fact that people don't want to know, right? There are many people who are incentivized to keep their job, keep their power, stay in a place of relevance by keeping the status quo.
Yeah.
So you combine those things, and it's tough not to be super pessimistic. I mean, I see this. I mean, we need to draw attention to what's happening. We need to draw attention to the fact that unarmed people are dying, and there has to be a better way to deal with it. So that's like an immediate thing that needs to be solved for sure.
Right.
And then the rest of this moment to me is like just hope that it doesn't completely explode. I mean, I don't want to go down a whole other path, but I mean, you look at what's going on in Syria and Iran and Israel facing each other.
Right.
This looks like this has the makings of a real war, like a war between armies, as opposed to sort of the protest demonstration versus the response. That's coming too, and one thing that will be, I don't know how that will work out for Israel. I don't know how that'll work out for Iran, but I know it won't work out well for the Palestinian people.
Yeah.
There's no way it does, right? There's no way that an outcome between an increasingly hot war between Israel and Iran makes things better. I mean, that I know I just opened up a whole other thing, but
well, there's a couple of places. I want to go, and some of it includes what you said there. So let's take it there. So let's take a look at this, the move of the embassy to Jerusalem. Let's take a look at that specifically, right? It is. We've talked about it before. We've covered it on air. We talked about it extensively when you were here in Atlanta and we were just hanging out. It brings a lot of forces together that you would look at and say, why are they allies in this, right? And specifically, we could take Pastor Robert Jeffers, who represents, and John Hagee, who was there also. He was there.
These ones actually make me chuckle a little bit, then. So it's like a dark chuckle, but I do laugh.
So they were there today, and they represent the end time prophecy wing of evangelical Christianity that really looks at this move from a Revelations apocalyptic point of view. This is a necessary step to the second coming of Christ. And, considering their view of what's going to happen to Israel and to the Jewish people, you would think that, the Israeli government and the Jewish people would be like, yeah, we don't really want this type of person here, but there they were in front of the prime minister of Israel, and you've explained that pretty good, like pretty succinctly. How do people like Benjamin Netanyahu or just Jewish people in general, Israeli people, look at evangelicals who support them because they believe it's going to lead to the destruction of Israel and the conversion of 144,000 in order to bring Jesus back? Help. How does that work?
Yeah. Well, there's a number of approaches. I mean, one, you could say that it's simply dismissed as if people want to have their fictions and they're amenable to us. If they work for somebody like Netanyahu, they'll go for it. I think there's another way of putting it, which I'm not sure if I've offered here, but might be of some use. It's important to note that particularly people who come from the school of thought of Netanyahu, we've already had our end times. The Jewish people. We've already had our greatest catastrophe, like the Holocaust,
right?
Was as bad as, so over 1/3 of, if there were three Jews, one of them died in the Holocaust, more than one.
Yeah.
Right. And so there's some extent to which I think that we are all I say we, I don't mean, I don't know. The pronouns are getting tricky because there are some of these things that I'm very sympathetic towards and others that I'm not. But somebody like Netanyahu thinks, quote, from his mind, like, we've already been through the end times, right? It cannot get any worse. These people have this thing in their head about what's going to happen at some time to come. We've already been through the absolute worst fires of hell, and whatever they think, who cares, right? Just, like, if they're willing to support us for now, like, we'll deal with it later. Right. We'll deal with it. That theologically, right. If, many Israeli leaders have been known to say, we'll sort that out when the Messiah comes. Right.
That's perfect.
Right. When the Mashiach, which is what the Jewish, when the Mashiach shows up, we'll see, we'll ask him. Right. And until then, we're not going to worry about it. I mean, that is one approach. It's that there's a problem with that approach. It's another sort of, a famous thing in Jewish life, right? You worry about the anti-Semite, but you really worry about the philo-Semite, right? The person who sort of irrationally is really attracted to Jews. And the famous example of this is Martin Luther, to get some deep history. So Martin Luther, before the Reformation, was really sort of thought the Jews would be good, thought the Jews would help him fight the Catholic Church. And then when they didn't convert, when the Reformation came, he became one of the world's great anti-Semites. And we see this pattern consistently. A lot of people say, oh, the Jews, they'll they'll join up, they'll become Christians, they'll become this, they'll join that, and they're really good on them for a while, and then they don't, and they turn on them. Which is to say that it would be very easy for me to see the kind of energy from a Jeffress or a Hagee, which is very philo-Semitic now, become anti-Semitic. That's my perspective. The Israeli perspective, I think, is one, we've already been through the fires of hell, and whatever these guys are talking about, we just don't care. Two, when the Messiah shows up, we'll ask him. And three, right now, you know what? America's still got the most guns and the most money, and they got a whole bunch of people who are, I'll be as nice as possible, very committed to this particular ideology. So, I guess I'll add a fourth thing, right? There are not enough Jews in the world for your support to come from the Jewish world. I mean, there's only, the number fluctuates, some 12 to 15 million Jews in the entire world. How many evangelical Christians are there?
I mean, there's that many in Georgia, so
right. I mean, I don't know what counts as evangelical exactly, but particularly in with growth in South America and growth in Africa, we're eventually talking about potentially a billion people or whatever. Right. And so you kind of like weigh it out in the balance, right? There's this risk that the philo-Semites become anti-Semites. There's the fact that it looks ridiculous. Right, like it looks absolutely absurd to stand next to a guy who says you're going to hell and watch him. So that's the downside, right? The downside is that it is internally inconsistent and looks crazy, and the positive side is that where are you going to get your support from, particularly if you don't trust a lot of the world?
That second option that you threw out there is that we'll talk to the Messiah when he comes. We'll figure it out. I think that's like, in a way, it's actually a brilliant technique, just to say, okay, sure, you believe that's fine, and so give us everything that we want in the meantime.
Yeah.
And then when Jesus comes, then we'll answer to him.
I mean, is that not? I don't know enough about sort of the evangelical fundraising game, but it seems like there's a lot of promises involved. That's
literally.
I've watched some Joel Osteen or whatever, right? Like I've got a very, very, very thin understanding of this, but I know there's a lot of promises involved. A lot of things will be paid back later.
Right.
And so why not sort of use their game with them?
Yeah.
And look, there's something that we didn't say in that whole conversation, which needs to be said. There is a ton of Islamophobia involved in this alliance.
In the overlap. Yeah.
I mean, absolutely. And they come from pretty different places. I don't think that they are single cause. And I'm not going to pretend to understand exactly the deep roots of like John Hagee's like Iran stuff, which I know is pretty out there. But both, the Netanyahu government or the Israeli right, much of the settler movement obviously is steeped in a lot of deep dislike of Arabs and Muslims. The evangelical world, I don't know. Again, I'm not an expert in that at all, but I know that strand runs deep, and so there's that too.
So it runs deep. It runs deep, but it's actually an internal contradiction in itself, right? So we had this conversation, a similar conversation like this in person, and what's fascinating is the way in which evangelicals view, with a I don't know what kind of lens we would call the way they view Jewish people, because like in the back of their minds, we're like, well, one day you're going to be destroyed, but until then we're friends. I can't say that that's a positive view. It's something that it's twisted, but it has a positive veneer, if nothing else. It has gives the opportunity for some type of temporary alliance and friendship. But it's internal contradiction in the sense that, like, based on even how we read Genesis and Ishmael, the story of Ishmael, the fact that Ishmael too is going to be blessed, that Ishmael was going to be father of a great nation, and he was going to have 12 sons, and so in the Christian faith, even evangelical faith is like they still preach this, they still know the scripture is there, but there's like a complete erasure of it. I don't know how far back it goes. I just know that it post 9/11 became the centerpiece of evangelical intersection with politics. It became the center. Like prior to that, it wasn't. It was there. It was mostly silence about Islam, but now it became weaponized in the sense of just not only erasure. I think before 2011, it was just erasure. We just won't talk about it. It's not really the big deal. They're part of the Abrahamic faiths. There's some commonalities there. Blah blah blah. But 9/11 really sent people like John Hagee into the stratosphere in their Islamophobia.
Yeah, no, that sounds right. I mean, I know that the Iranian Revolution set some of this up before that, and I'm sure that if you really know the stuff, it goes farther back. But yeah, absolutely, 9/11 is, of course, and it seems for a couple of reasons. I mean, one, obviously, there became an intense fear of Islam, related to the attacks, but also it just kind of fed into a kind. I mean, it seems to me that the evangelical movements tend to like moments of millennialism, moments where things seems like everything has changed, the next era is coming. I mean, frankly, all religions, there are strands of this in Judaism and Islam as well. I don't know so much about Catholicism, but I'm sure there is. But I know that evangelical Christianity is pretty into these moments that can be sort of marked off as very special and potentially telling of the return of Jesus maybe or some new era. And so 9/11 was for a lot of people that kind of cataclysmic thing. Yeah,
and I'm right. I'm glad you mentioned the Iranian Revolution. That was, I guess if we kind of modeled this, there are so many places. This part I'm going to take offline because I'm really just thinking out loud here. How it really hinges also upon their intersection with the Republican Party, right? The reaction to the Iranian Revolution with particularly Ronald Reagan as he came into power, that really was a turning point for the evangelical movement as well. So it wasn't like lock and stone in terms of a theological difference with the Iranian Revolution, but more so the marriage of Ronald Reagan and the evangelical church in reaction to Jimmy Carter's version of evangelicalism, right? So Jimmy Carter is the quintessential evangelical, if you ask me, right? But the evangelical church began changing their paradigm in terms of their perception and their participation in politics, and that was right around the time of the Iranian Revolution. So I think it's more, I think those things coincided, but I think the causal relationship is really the marriage and the shift of the evangelical church away from the Jimmy Carter version to the Ronald Reagan version.
No, I think that sounds right. I mean, there's a huge shift in Israeli politics at the same time, which is probably relevant to it. In 1977, Menachem Begin becomes prime minister, the first ever Likud prime minister, and him and Carter sort of go at it, and we see the potential for daylight between the evangelical movement and the hardline Israeli government, and then Reagan is just a complete backtrack from that.
Right.
Like to say that no, evangelicalism never would be something that would push hard on an Israeli government, on settlement movements, this kind of thing. So those things all kind of stir together at the same movement. You have a real shift in Israeli politics where the right wing gets its first hold. Then you get the Iranian Revolution. You've got that Carter moment where he is he is the evangelical president at the time. I mean, he's the one who talks to God at night, but people don't laugh like they did at somebody like Bush.
And the one that teaches Sunday school every Sunday while he was president,
Read the. I think I recently read the Bible in Spanish. Like he was this very. I don't know exactly why, but maybe just to learn. Because his constituents or whatever. But sort of a really very not the kind of person that I think of as the contemporary evangelical movement, but at the time the face of evangelicism.
So I think that's the crux of it, right? You had a internal domestic shift in terms of political ideologies and allegiances with the evangelical church moving away very intentionally based on the leadership of some key operatives, Republican operatives, who seized upon the separation between and actually, before I even finish that sentence, as deep as I was into that sentence, I have to stop because the other arm of this was Roe versus Wade. Right. And it's amazing how the timing of this, we saw Roe versus Wade become one of the reasons the evangelical church shifted away from Jimmy Carter into the arms of Ronald Reagan and the onslaught of the moral voters, the moral majority voters. And all of that moved the evangelical church into the arms of the Republican Party. And a part of that was Ronald Reagan's look towards the Iranian Revolution, or his approach towards the Iranian Revolution, which really could be or really should be a factor as we try to figure out this weird relationship between evangelicals who look towards the second coming, which is inclusive of an end times apocalyptic treatment of Israel. But still, they find camaraderie around one of these last pillars that we didn't mention earlier, which is Islamophobia. But I'm wondering now, and we won't do it today, but I'm sure if we go back further, we could probably find other examples of Islamophobia embedded in evangelical Christianity in the United States, and whether or not it actually found allyship with the right in Israel, I don't know, but I think we have to at least go back, like you said, to the Iranian Revolution.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's certainly the case that that the first right-wing Israeli prime minister, Begin, spent a lot of his early days talking about the Christian minority in Lebanon and trying to draw upon Carter's sympathies in order to use that as a means to go into Lebanon and take out the PLO. And as far as I know, Carter wasn't really into it, but it certainly looks like Reagan was more so. So, absolutely. I mean, we are not in the position to tie these together directly, but I will say that
I disagree though. I disagree.
Yeah.
I think, off the top of our head today, we've actually tied together some things that I'm sure there's got to be at least 12 books on this, but, off the top of our heads, we've kind of pieced this together. You and I should probably write a book about this, whenever we get the actual free time to do something more than these podcasts.
That's true. Well, hey, I would be interested. I mean, I will say this, that there, on the one hand, you have to be humble when you're connecting dots and make sure that you're not too sure of where you've gone. On the other hand, just being able to, to tie it back to our previous segment, right? When somebody like Kushner, points to demonstrators and says they are the problem, right? In order, the best solution to that is to realize that things are tied in a lot of different directions. And I'm
going to be confident. I'm going to be overly confident in the connections we just created, man. No, all right.
Well, no, this is in your position, I think that is a good way to go. In mine, it might be less so.
Yeah,
but
you have a different threshold in terms of evidence. So
yes, that is right. But where we can come together is working through ideas and realizing that things are connected in multiple directions. I mean, that gives you a much better opportunity to not fall into the kind of traps that are being baited by let's say the people, Jewish, Christian, or otherwise, giving speeches today at the embassy in Jerusalem. Right, they are laying traps for you because they assume you'll just
take their word for it.
Take the word for it. Right. Take the two-sentence version of it when in fact that's worse than none in some cases.
So the next part of this I wanted to talk about is this notion, to me it's a twisted notion that this move today, the move of the embassy to Jerusalem, and I'm sorry if I sound overly congested, I'm getting over a sinus infection here, but this move is in and of itself a step towards peace. This is actually a line that's coming from some voices in the White House. But then on the other side of it, people who see this and say that, maybe this could be a move towards peace because it actually takes America out of the equation as an honest broker once and for all. And so an impediment to peace has been the idea that the United States was an honest broker in the relations or the negotiations between the two states, or Israel and Palestine, rather. What do you think about that? Of course, I mean, just throwing the White House talking point out the window, in my opinion, but unless you see something to it.
No, I mean the only thing I see in that direction is that at least it's something that can't be lorded over anymore. But that's not very much. So no, the White House talking points, it's just a talking point. I mean, there was never any doubt in any American mind that eventually, America, under whatever conditions, would recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, ideally under context of peace and alongside a Palestinian state. That's long been a Palestinian capital in East Jerusalem. That's long been established. So nothing was established here that is useful. I mean, nothing. Yeah. I mean, I guess what they're saying is, I don't even know. I don't want to guess. No, absolutely not. There's nothing about this move which is positive for peace in that sense, in the sense that you are pointing to getting America out of the way. I'm sympathetic to it. I mean, following the history of this pretty closely for a long time, it's hard to see any, in the last, some people would say ever. I would disagree with that. But over the last 15, 20 years, it's hard to see anything positive America has done to move towards peace. And that's a long time. The problem is that I don't see who fills in.
Right.
This has to be brokered now, and if there's no honest broker, you have to find a dishonest broker. I mean, it depends where you stand, right? Like, I mean, I'm somebody who, I'm a dinosaur on this, but the worst solution, except for every other solution, is a two-state solution, and that's where I'm at. And every other option to me looks like eternal war in which, lots and lots of people die. And so if you're committed to that idea, which I am, somebody has to stand in between. And maybe America's position is just so, they're just so out of it in terms of being able to offer any sense of balance that just go into the deck and picking a new card would be as good. But I don't see who plays the role, right? The Russians are not going to play this role. I don't see how the Chinese play this role. I think we're past the point where, the like-minded countries of Northern Europe, so the Oslo Accords, which have not gone well, but were a sign of great hope at the time, right? They were negotiated by the Norwegians, but they were ensured and they were fostered into existence. They were midwiped into existence by America and guarantees of financial support and so on that really only America could do. So I'm not, if you could offer me and say, like, look, here, this is the party, right? This is why I think that some part of the Arab world can play this role, and that the Russians could be anything other than chaos creators, or I don't know, the Canadians will step up and do it. Then I would be more sympathetic. I don't see it. I don't see who the next option is. I don't see who stands there between, in this. And again, it seems like a pie in the sky dream, but someday, I maybe it's messianic, but I believe we can have.
We all have our own versions of a messianic dream, right?
Right. So this is mine, right? And in my head, the person standing between the two parties is probably an American president. And I know right now that sounds so incredibly ridiculous because you look at president of the United States is. And so if you look at that and say, look, that is just so there is no way to get from here to there. So I'll just go to the deck. I'll just take a random new card and start over. Then I'm not totally, I get you, but I still don't see it.
Let me posit something, and I want you to shoot it down as much as you need to. I think the solution really more and more on the international stage is the United States is the problem, not the solution. Particularly if we look at the North and South Korea as a model, I think the only solution can come internally. I think, like the South, there needs to be an internal movement in Israel, and this is where I really need you to, what's the likelihood of something like this? I have no idea, but to oust the right-wing government and to bring in a movement of more, I don't know the right word to call it. I don't want to say liberal, but in terms of people who are sympathetic.
Peace-seeking.
Yes,
peace-seeking.
There you go. Peace-seeking government, and then and only then could you have an opportunity for a way forward, because now you have the United States, and it depends on who the next president is and then the subsequent presidents are. But now you have the United States on the side of Israel, but in a very I don't want to say violent is not the right word, but in a way that there's really no pretense anymore. And there's really no limit to, if there was a third broker or another broker to come onto the scene, the United States would just crush them, whether it's through diplomacy, sanctions or whatever. They're just going to do whatever, especially particularly underneath Trump, they're going to do whatever Netanyahu and the Likud party wants, right? So it's got to come internally. So what are the chances, or what's the likelihood of an internal revolution, so to speak? And that word's kind of harsh to use, but you know what I mean?
Yeah. Not good.
Well, there's that. Good night, folks.
They're not good. I mean, the best that I can sort of lay it out quickly is that, these are sort of cliches about the Israeli political scene, but they can be fairly useful. Is that, what you have in Israel is at this point, it's been for quite a while, like, maybe 4 or so really entrenched blocks, right? Like people who are not likely to switch over. And one of those blocks is certainly a sort of liberal, more secular, more generally more peace inclined group, and that will be there and it won't go anywhere. But the mass of people in the other, so I mean, basically what you have is you have an Arab bloc of voters who obviously is not going to be voting for Likud anytime soon. You've got mostly secular, like Ashkenazi Jewish European origin bloc, which votes largely for Labor against Likud, and then you have a couple of more traditional, and you've got the Jews from the Arab world tend to vote in a bloc, and they tend to be very conservative. And then you have the real religious Jews, and they tend to be conservative also. And these groups are like kind of roughly equal in size, and people don't switch between them. It's not like it's like it's like they're really entrenched identity groups.
Okay.
So I mean, I think we're getting there in the United States also, frankly, where Democrats and Republicans are becoming entrenched identity groups, but these have ethnic histories, religious backgrounds, and so on. So, in other words, if it happens really slowly and chipping at the margins. You're not going to get one of those groups to like shift into the other column quickly. It's just it's like. It's not just sort of how they vote; it's who they are.
Right. Right.
Now, demographic trends could change that, but they don't look good at all. The demographic growth is much greater amongst the conservative groups of Israeli society.
Really?
Oh, considerably so. I mean, it's if only because the more traditional religious people have many more kids, and so you have birth rates amongst the more liberal population, which look more like Europe.
Yeah. And
you have birth rates amongst the Mizrahi, which is the Jews of Arab descent population, much higher, and amongst the really right wing European or originating Jews at a very high rate. And so, I mean, I don't know. So could it happen?
Doesn't look good.
It doesn't look good on that front. I mean, look, demographics are never destiny, right? They always they always come back to bite you. You try to project on them. It's also, possible that it doesn't take that it's less of a mass movement and more of a handful of leaders who are really able to make a case. I mean, people, as much as they're entrenched, it doesn't mean that they can't see what's in front of them if it gets bad enough.
Right.
And then look, the on the Palestinian side, you have to look at the dynamics as well, and you have to look at the inability to come to a united front amongst the Palestinian factions, and they've got a crisis of political leadership coming up soon too. I mean, Abbas he's 80 something and he smokes 2 packs of cigarettes a day. He's not going to be here forever. So I guess the best thing that you could say is that there will be shakeups.
But is it sufficient?
It's hard to see how the dynamics don't make it. It seems like it's likely to make things worse, not better. Right. But I do think you're right. I mean, it has to come. It's true. Absolutely, things have to come internally.
Yeah.
Right. Like if there's not a change in the Israeli viewpoint, then there won't be a significant move towards peace. The problem I think that I was getting at before is that even that's not enough.
Right.
Because it only takes one person to spoil a peace process if you do it the right way.
Yeah.
It takes one bus blown up. It takes one leader assassinated, and we've seen this over and over again. And that's where external guarantees are so important.
Right. That's what I was, even as I mentioned it, I was thinking back, what year was that? The prime minister was assassinated. I was thinking back in the 90s.
1995, Yitzhak Rabin.
Yes, that's exactly what I thought about. As I mentioned it, I said, as promising as that period was, we saw what happened there and how it changed the course. Like those tragic events often do. I want to shift gears to something that just popped up in my mind, and just we'll close out this. What the Likud party? They're a secular party, right? Ostensibly.
Yeah. So ostensibly they are. So they are not a religious party. A very quick history, like very quick, and well, being who I am, I want to say you can go read 20 books like you had mentioned. But very, very quickly, so yes, this was the party of the opposition against the Labor Party. The Labor Party was Ben-Gurion's party, the founding prime minister of Israel. And they were in charge until, 1977. And then this long-standing opposition figure, Menachem Begin, was elected in 1977. It is, on the one hand, a secular party. On the other hand, the reason behind Begin's ascent to the prime ministership was mostly through the religious. So his appeal was, he was a secular guy, but very respectful of religious ritual. Like he knew how to enact religious activities. He knew how to pray. He knew how to follow the laws of the Sabbath and so on and so forth. And he was very sort of proud about that. And he appealed largely to Jews from the Arab world who had migrated to Israel, who were facing civil rights abuses at the time, and they happened to be more religious. And so the Likud's strength in large part came from an appeal to tradition and saying, hey, like, you religious people who came here to do our labor, like, we respect you and we're gonna defend you.
Okay, all right, it makes more sense now, because as I'm looking at this, there is clearly a religious component to the calculus, right? And I'm wondering how much of, let me parse this carefully or slowly. I'm wondering, to what extent is the divide between secularism and like fundamentalism, how much of and I'm just going to use the word calculus because it is a huge problem that can't be solved by a conversation on the podcast. But I'm curious how much of this is driven by religion versus history by itself, nationalism, or any other factors that would drive a secular view of Palestine?
Yeah. So it's very hard, but I mean here. So, okay. It is very true that the Israeli right features people who are extremely religious and people who are atheist bordering on anti-Semitic.
Wow.
Somebody like Avigdor Lieberman really does not like religious Jews.
Wow.
He really doesn't, as like in terms of like a worldview.
Okay.
Whereas somebody like Naftali Bennett, who's another member of a right-wing party, is a religious Zionist settler who believes that Jews need to settle all of the biblical land of Israel. So they are on a team together. The thing that that unites them is a fear of annihilation. Mm. And that's the story that so Menachem Begin, just to do the history, I mean, so his appeal to religion was in some part his religious focus that he put on Israel as the salvation of the Jewish people. Right. And so for a religious person, that means like salvation in the religious sense, which is, familiar from other religions. For many members of Likud or other right wing parties, it means literally the salvation from extinction. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right. And those things are on the one hand, they go together really well. But on the other hand, they're very opposite. Right, because so they go together well, and that there's a fear that Jews will go away, and this would be this would be bad for both religious and secular alike. Right. But they're very different to the extent that the one. Well, it's what can you get away with in order to persevere, right? And the sort of secular hardliners have different lines, things that you don't have, things from religious tradition that can be thrown away, right? That the religious don't have. But it is absolutely an alliance of people who have very, very different worldviews. I mean, the people in the Israeli right do not agree on very much, except for the expansion of Israeli territory for not exactly the same reasons.
So you actually went exactly where my head was trying to piece this together, right? So that's the expansion of Israel. And when I said history, you read right through that. That's the word I couldn't think of in the moment was annihilation, right? I could see that as a common thread. The fear of annihilation could be a common thread across no matter what ideology. All things considered, that's a reasonable fear for people who went through the Holocaust. All right. So you pieced that together for me brilliantly.
And to be clear, this is important. I'm sorry to interrupt.
But,
But the Holocaust was the culmination of centuries and centuries of destruction and
absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, I think we've talked about this too. Like that's like an amazing feature of the Jewish people. The survival of empires after empire after empire after empire, culminating with the Holocaust. But to the expansion of Israel. You mentioned a part of the right wing in Israel that wants to expand to the biblical promised land. And
essentially,
which is I don't know. Well, I'm curious, how big of a movement is there in Israel, in the Israel right, that actually sees the goal to expand that far? And that's what I mean. That's like a religiously driven goal,
for sure,
versus the secular expansion.
So to say biblical Israel, that would be to cross the Jordan River. Then you would cross the Jordan River. You would have the tribes, the 12 tribes, right? So there's 3 of them that have land on the other side of the Jordan River. Right. So there are definitely people who believe this. I don't know if it's much of a, I don't know if there's much of a political movement for that, for like there certainly are amongst like certain sort of very intense religious people, but so not quite. That exists, but that is like pretty that would be pretty. Well, I don't know where Jordan would go. I don't know how you would
apocalyptic
do this.
would be a good word.
Right.
You know,
and
because
it reaches up into Lebanon. I
right,
mean, it's,
exactly. Some of Iraq,
yeah,
some like most of Syria.
Yes,
so
that's right.
You're talking about the biblical promised land is like, you know, so that's really the question I wanted to get to, like what the driving differences.
So I would say the people who have that belief, those would be like the people who are really into like the Left Behind series in America or something, right? Like they exist, but and they might exert some political influence. But I do not know of any political figure who would say that we need to take back the land of the tribe of Manasseh, right? Which like stretches through Jordan. However, you know, theoretically speaking, there is a Jewish belief that is possibly something that will happen.
Wow.
But that's not I mean, that would be the equivalent of sort of Revelations kind of stuff. For,
that would be
Christians.
The equivalent of John Hagee and Robert Jeffress here in the United.
Yeah, something like that. It's the sort of thing that like, well, if God does that, then okay, fine. I mean, what are you going to do? Right. But the idea of going and getting it, I would say that's fairly. That would be pretty marginal, but not non-existent. What is very much not marginal, which is a funny way of putting it, but is everything east of the Jordan River. I mean, west of the Jordan River. Sorry. So what is now the Palestinian West Bank becoming entirely part of Israel? That is a mainstream opinion.
Wow.
I mean, that's a mainstream opinion. Now, what that means about the people who live there is another question. I say mainstream in that wedge of the politics.
Gotcha.
So in the people who are expansionists, and there is a combination of religious and non-religious elements to it. I mean, one thing that's tricky, and I think most people don't really understand, is that the majority of the Jewish religious sites in that part of the world, whatever we want to call it, in Israel, Palestine, right, are in the Palestinian West Bank. Right. So Rachel's tomb, the cave of the patriarchs, all sorts of prophets, tombs, a lot of that stuff, most of that stuff is actually in the Palestinian West Bank. So it's outside of Bethlehem or in Hebron or near all over the place. And so that's a religious reason that a lot of people are very committed to the idea this should be part of Israel. Then there is, of course, if the distance between the edge of the West Bank and the rest of Israel, Tel Aviv is very small. So from a security perspective, that also is a thread that you see. And I think that you're pointing to something really useful, and hopefully I haven't been too convoluted in getting to it. These desires between the secular hardliners who like to talk security and or would like to rid the land of enemies, right, combined with like these ancient religious desires to be able to access holy sites and the places that you read about in the Bible. And it's an uneasy marriage, right? They don't go together like ideologically all that well. A secularist who's primarily concerned with security and is really hard line about getting rid of every Arab, and a religious person who believes that the place that Abraham purchased to bury Sarah needs to be part of Israel. And those go together in a sense because those go together in like a voting block potentially to form a government, but the people don't agree with each other. Right, because the one thinks that the fairy story about Abraham is ridiculous, and the other thinks that the other person is an irreligious somebody who shouldn't be considered a real Jew. And yet politically, they can get along quite well because they both want to expand the land. Does that make sense, or did I totally?
No. It took both of us a while to get to that, right? Because I didn't really, I intuitively I knew the question, but I couldn't form it, and when you helped me find it, and that's the question. Now here's the last question: where does Benjamin Netanyahu fit in between those two extremes?
Yeah, so he is the guy. He's like the Begin character. He is the guy who knows enough about the religious stuff to speak the language, and knows how to go to the right religious leaders and get them on board. But personally, is I think 100% about what in his mind is security and fear of annihilation.
And I'm asking about that because I find something fascinating. I find it fascinating in the United States, in Syria, and now in this conversation about Israel. Secularist in league with fundamentalists.
Yep.
And it is an interesting phenomenon that I don't think I've read any papers or books on that I want to research as soon as we get off the air, because I'm not really sure what is more dangerous in some sense, because fundamentalists, while they may speak in apocalyptic terms, where they would kill all the women and children and smite the earth and, bring back no prisoners kind of speak, it's like secularists who actually sometimes carry it out in their own way. I'm just thinking out loud here. So I actually want to table that until I can find the right book that actually somebody's already synthesized this, I'm sure.
Well, partially what you're talking about is nationalism, right?
Yes, exactly that.
Exactly. That there's this incredible power to nationalism, which overrides all sorts of other ideologies, and that acts a lot like religion, has a lot in common with religion, and often doesn't have the peace rhetoric of religion. Right.
You remember, this is why we need to work together, because you actually just you took the other thing that I left out. It was in my head, but you're right. There's still a redeeming virtue in most religious fundamentalists, that there is a piece of them that includes peace. Now, to a greater or lesser extent in fundamentalists, we've seen, obviously, but the rhetoric, you remove the peace rhetoric and all you're left with is the violent nationalism. I mean, that's a terrifying notion. And we actually see some of that in play across the globe.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, a bunch of historical examples come out, right?
Yes.
But for Soviet communism, like really couldn't get going until it embraced like a nationalism, even though communism was supposed to be an internationalist, non-national movement, but nonetheless they embraced Russian nationalism in order to get people to sacrifice and to fight, and it's I don't know. I mean, there's a lot written on it, obviously, but there is that nationalisms have the ability to drive people to incredible lengths, and they often don't have any of the undergirding, and this is all for God's glory and peace.
Right. Right. And not even that is a consoling idea, because a lot of religious fundamentalism is at the core of quite a bit of violence across our globe. But then there's still that hope of the desire for peace at some degree. But if you subtract that away completely, then all you're left with is a violent form of secularism that's able to co-opt religious fundamentalism, even though they hate, at the core, they probably hate religious fundamentalists, but they understand the marriage between nationalism and fundamentalism, and they weaponize that in their domestic politics and then implement that on an international stage. It is fascinating.
And if you want to go back to that embassy and just say, who do you have on that stage, right? You've got secular leaders who are obsessed with security, and you've got religious fundamentalists, you've got religious Jewish fundamentalists, you've got religious Christian fundamentalists. They don't agree on anything except that these hardline tactics need to be taken. So what you said makes sense.
Wow. Matt, thanks so much for your time as we addressed the specific, we addressed the pertinent, and then we meandered into some interesting places we could probably research.
We did. We went some places. But it got my mind off of things for a few minutes.
Yeah.
That's good.
Yeah. Hopefully we did the same, because there's not much we could do today to change that situation, but learning more about the situation and teaching others about it as we learn may be the only seeds that we can plant to change it.
Yeah, let's hope tomorrow is a better day. There's no guarantee of that at all, but let's hope it is.
And you mean that in the very literal sense, not just a figurative.
Literally tomorrow. I mean, May 15th, Tuesday, May 15th, 2018. I hope it's better and not worse. But it could be could go either way. Well, thanks for the opportunity to get a lot off my chest, Ben. I appreciate it.
Yeah, no, thank you. And thank you for educating me as I I know how to ask questions. That's one of my gifts. I know how to ask questions, and you definitely had some answers that I think will be illuminating to the audience. And you are covering for me on Wednesday. Is that right?
That's right. And I think I was thinking about it anyway, but now after this, I think I'm going to I'm going to bring in somebody to talk a bit about Iran and Israel.
Good.
And I'm sure we'll have to also cover events in Jerusalem and on Gaza, but we'll bring in a guest who really knows her stuff on Iran, and we'll deal with some of the hopefully by then we'll be able to deal with some of the bigger picture issues. But if we have to talk about the crisis of the day, we can do that too.
Absolutely. Professor Matt Sienkiewicz, he's the Associate Professor of International Studies and International. Not studies, right? Is it international studies?
Communication and international studies.
Right, I know communications, but international studies. I don't know why that throws me.
That's right.
I haven't said it in a while.
Well, you want to say relations, but it's studies.
Exactly, because that's my...
Yeah.
Okay, so let me do it again. Professor Matt Sienkiewicz, Associate Professor at Boston College of International Studies and Communications. Thanks so much for hanging out with me, Matt.
Thanks, Matt. I appreciate it.
Whew. Okay, that was a long one. Thanks so much for hanging out with us, everyone. I hope that you were able to pull some stuff out of the last half of the conversation. I definitely am going to be looking for a book on the marriage between secularism, virulent secularism, religious fundamentalism, and how they intersect or how they cooperate for the purposes of nationalism. There's got to be a book. I don't know where it is, but as soon as I find it, I'll tell you about it. And so thanks for hanging out. Go to patreon.com/the BPD show. Become a patron today. Thanks for all of our supporters. And last week was super busy, so thanks for your patience. And we're back in the saddle. I will see you tomorrow. Take care, everyone.
The Benjamin Dixon Show is only possible with listener support. Go to www.thebenjamindixonshow.com to register for our blog and join the Progressive Army.